Let's just rest a little together. Let's get our bodies comfortable, relaxed. Invite the body to be in a position that's awake, but is still loving of this body. What position? What position does this body want to be in right now? So if you want to sit upright, that's great. But if you also feel like you'd like to just rest against the back of your seat, just allow yourself to do that. You can close your eyes if that feels comfortable. For some of us who are new, that may not feel comfortable, and that's fine. And if that's the case, you're certainly welcome to just rest your gaze somewhere in front of you. Feeling your feet on the floor. And feeling the weight of the body anchoring you, grounding you. And now maybe even becoming aware of breathing. In whatever form breathing is for you at the moment, if it's fast and tense or slow, doesn't matter. You're just asking for a kind and loving attention to what is. And if at any time during the guidance this evening, if you don't feel comfortable or you don't want to follow the invitations, it's fine. Just do what makes you feel most comfortable. But if it does seem okay with you, how about taking a moment just to check in with yourself? Same way you might check in with a friend. You might say, hey, how you doing? Imagining this friend has asked you that and that you can honestly answer. Just noticing what's there. How are you really doing? And as you start to connect with answers, whatever is arising, naming those feelings, those thoughts, see if it's possible to locate how those feel in the body. Where is it being carried? Are the shoulders tight? Is the forehead furrowed? Or does it reside in the belly? And as you make contact with awareness of where in the body these feelings are living for you, see if you can continue to offer a kind attention, a loving attention, letting them be and holding them with care. We're not trying to change them. We're just letting them be and acknowledging that the feeling is there. And now we're going to see if we can do a practice with our breath to intentionally offer care to these areas that may be feeling less content, uncomfortable. So as you become aware of breathing, on your next in-breath, as you breathe in, invite the question, what do I need right now? What feels needed? Is it rest? Is it a sense of calm or connection? See what resonates for you. And if you can settle on one, and there's no right answer here. On that in-breath again, see if you can imagine that you're breathing in what you need. You're taking a deep breath, and as you breathe in, that which you need enters the body and fills the body with what is needed. Like a warm light filling a room. So on every in-breath, you're breathing in what feels needed right now. Savoring that. If you'd like to add on the out breath, letting go of what it is that you don't need. So you can imagine as you breathe out that you're breathing out the tension, the worry, the dis-ease. And sharing it out with the universe where it can be held in spaciousness. So if it feels comfortable for you, you're breathing in and filling the body with what feels needed. And breathing out, letting go what does not feel needed. Again, it's not forcing anything. It's not trying to make things different. It's just a gentle release. And so practicing this, if that feels right for you, for the next few minutes. I feel more settled. Well, so I'm going to start with a quote, and I've said this one before. The Buddha said, things, if clung to, are suffering or are a source of suffering. And suffering, it's one of those words that's kind of hard to define. What are we talking about? And suffering can be defined as describing anything that is uneasy, uncomfortable, unpleasant, difficult, causing pain or sadness. The renowned Thai teacher Buddhadasa Bhikkhu offers this. How can we get away from and become completely independent of things, all of which are transient, unsatisfactory, and devoid of selfhood? He goes on to say the answer is that we have to find out what the cause of our desiring those things and clinging to them is. And knowing that cause, we shall be in a position to eliminate clinging completely. Isn't that great?
Yeah.
Sounds so straightforward. So let's note that Buddhadasa said, quote, in a position to eliminate clinging completely. And I'm grateful if I can reduce clinging even just a little bit. So tonight is the second offering in a series of 4 talks on the topic of clinging to the stories of our lives. It's important to note that we're not talking about clinging to life itself, but to the stories of life, which we suggest is a pretty significant cause of our desiring those things and clinging to them, this thing called life. I spent some time in my talk in June, the first one of these in the series, talking about craving, clinging, and stories. And if you'd like to visit with that talk, see that talk, you can find it in the archives on the IMCC website. But briefly tonight, we're inviting the inquiry into how craving, which is different than simple wanting or desire, I think. This is what we think we're talking about.
We have opinions.
In that it is experienced as more unpleasant, a sense of feeling tense, and even angsty. Hoping you can relate to that. So when you're craving something, there's a whole body experience of like, and this leads to clinging or holding on to something or someone or ideas too tightly. And I've appreciated, I think it was Kristen Neff and Chris Germer who taught us this about that. This is clinging, which is different than holding, right? That makes sense? We can hold things, we can hold those we care for, but when we cling, it's tight, it's tense, it's angsty. And this leads to suffering. So I noted in June that our minds create stories about everything, like cookies and chairs. It's not the objects of the stories that impact us as much as the stories themselves. Some of these stories are wholesome and supportive of our well-being. Some are neutral, like my story of a chair, and some can lead to greater levels of suffering. The first step in working with our stories or mental formations is to see them for what they are. For example, I have a mental formation of a chair. It's highly transferable, actually. I'm sitting on a chair. You're sitting on a chair, a sort of chair. I think there may be a stool in here, which is also a chair. I can sit on the step. That's not a chair. I can sit on the floor. That's not a chair. An unobserved story comes between perception and what there is to be perceived. Once the mind offers the story of chair, I no longer perceive that this object is made of non-chair parts. This object is wood, fabric, glue. That's not what I perceive in my story, though. So enough about chairs. Let's talk about cookies. There are cookies here. And I actually got one a little early, so I get to play around with that a bit tonight. We have stories about cookies, and these stories are like a screen. And I did hunt down this teeny tiny little screen I brought for tonight. I would have loved a bigger one, but there it is. All of our screens are different and informed. So the screen comes between us, is what I want to say, comes between us and the object, okay? And they're all different. And so these screens are the place where craving arises. We have a story about something like cookies, for example. There's an attachment to how they taste, look, smell, etc. Or there's a story about how we used to have cookies with our family or best friend. Or feeling when eating a cookie that reminds us of experiencing being loved. These stories create craving for cookies, which can lead to clinging to an idea, which is another word for story, that we must have cookies. Embedded in the craving and clinging of cookies is suffering, to greater and lesser amounts, depending on your story of cookies. Do you want this?
No, I'll do fine. Thank you.
Okay.
Let me know if the sound is all right. Yeah. So here's where the Buddha's second noble truth comes alive for us. The second noble truth is the first noble truth. Let's start there. The first noble truth is there is suffering. The second noble truth is there is a cause of suffering. And the cause of suffering, the Buddha taught, is craving, clinging. Last week, I taught a bit about the wheel of life. And you may remember that in the center of the wheel are three animals: a pig, a cockerel, and a snake. These are known to represent the three poisons. The pig represents ignorance, the cockerel represents craving and greed, and the snake represents anger and hatred. Importantly, each animal is biting the tail of the one in front of it. They are literally feeding off each other, just as ignorance, greed, and hatred endlessly follow one another in our lives. So to end suffering, noble truth, there is a cause of suffering. That's the second. To end suffering, we must bring the wisdom of understanding to ignorance. And here's the wise thing we need to understand. All things are impermanent. That's it. That's the key. All things are impermanent. Craving these things causes suffering. Even if we get them, they're impermanent. They won't last. When we're craving a cookie, pretty soon it's gone. So when we become attached to our stories of cookies, cookies will make me happy. That's my story. Cookies make me happy. Cookies will make me feel better. That's my story. Then we necessarily buy into a state of suffering because, sadly, cookies don't last. And sadly, neither does the happiness that the cookies brought us. The cookie doesn't cause me to suffer, but my story about the cookie causing me to be happy, that causes me suffering. This kind of happiness that the cookie brought me is as impermanent as the cookie. So when we examine our story of cookies, we can see that our belief that our salvation by cookie ultimately causes us to suffer. Now, from our stories of cookies to our stories of life, are we supposed to not desire cookies? Are we supposed to not desire life? Absolutely not. We are each born with a healthy, innate desire to live, desire for pleasure, and desire to avoid pain. The desire only becomes problematic when it leads to that grasping, that clinging and craving of the pen or the cookie. So when we bring mindfulness to bear on our stories, we learn to see that our stories have us stuck. And when we're stuck in a story, we're causing ourselves to suffer.
There are thousands of definitions, which is another word for stories of life. If you go looking for them, what you will find depends upon which perspective, through which screen one is looking. Definitions come from biologists, astrophysicists, philosophers, spiritual teachers, poets, musicians, politicians, and so on. The invitation this evening, as always, is the invitation of the Buddha, and that is to look into the question from your own perspective. So looking at your own screen. Some of you may be familiar with mindfulness-based stress reduction, MBSR. And in that, Jon Kabat-Zinn offers an eating meditation with a raisin, in which he invites experiencing the raisin using beginner's mind, as if you were from another planet and had never seen a raisin before. This is a really fun practice. It's fun to do with brand new people too. I love doing that with students. I see Sandy who teaches as well. Yeah. You're on another world. You've never seen this object before. They look at you like you're crazy. Notably, a lot of people don't like raisins. So you can use other objects. So he invites, in the meditation, he invites you to replace. Let me start here. So you look at the object. You've never seen this before, right? You've never seen it. I don't know what it is. So you listen. Does it make a sound? And smell? And that smells good. And then ultimately you taste the object. And by doing this, the hope is that you'll bypass your story of what you already have for this object, which does happen, and can actually have direct contact again for the first time, like you've never seen it before. I want to share a little story related to that. I did that practice with a dear friend, and she was very successful in bypassing her story of raisin and instead replaced the story with of raisin with tick. So once that story entered her mind, her whole practice was that she had a tick. She was holding a tick, put that in her mouth. When the meditation ended, she spit the raisin out forcefully, very forcefully. and had to leave for a little while. So the power of our stories and believing our stories is pretty remarkable. She didn't completely lose a story, but she did replace it so much so that then her mind was responding, and there was no convincing it otherwise. So can we invite this level of beginner's mind to our inquiry into our perception of what life is? You know, in the same way that we might look at a cookie, listen to a cookie, sniff, you know, I don't know what this is. Can we do that with life? Can we pass through the screens and make direct contact with life? Can we see our stories as stories?
So as Anna alluded to earlier, as the Buddha suggests, we can investigate our own experience by asking some questions. He doesn't want us to take anything on faith. We ask ourselves the questions, we see what our experience is. So where does the story of cookie end and the cookie begin? Should be the other way around. Where does the cookie end and my story of the cookie begin? There we go. Where does my definition of life end and my stories of life begin? In other words, what's the story I'm actually believing that causes me to cling to my life? We're really asking ourselves to step back and see what is that screen that we're holding up that we don't usually see. So 2 questions for our contemplation this evening. What is life? Shouldn't take you long. What is life? And second, what are the stories of life that cause me to cling to it? We'll take about 10 minutes to write about both of those questions. The invitation is for you to just write, stream of consciousness, just let the pen keep moving. I'll ring the bell at 5 minutes so you know that it's time to move on to the second question if you haven't already, at which time I will also repeat the second question. And we understand that 5 minutes may not be nearly long enough for you to complete the answers to these questions, and you are welcome to continue the exercise at home. When the 10 minutes are up, we'll ring the bell again and then gather in small groups of 3 to talk over what you've discovered. We really hope you'll stay and talk in a group, or at least be a part of the group. When Anna and I did this exercise separately at different times, and then we met together and talked about what we discovered, we were really surprised and delighted by the differences. We had nothing the same. And it was fun to see how we approach the questions so differently. So Brianna will create breakout groups of 3, if possible, and 4 if we need to, in the Zoom room when it's time. And for now, for the next 5 minutes, if you will just start writing about what is life. In 5 minutes, I'll ring a bell and you can move to. The second question is, what is my story of life that I'm clinging to? Or what are my stories?
Right. So direct contact. Before we wind up, what does direct contact with life look like? When I was answering that question, what is life? It was breathing, coffee, air, grocery store. Coffee comes up, right? My sister. You see what I'm saying? What direct contact without the screen in between? What is life? Sitting, breeze, light, breathing.
And I did an amalgamation of those things. I did adventure, trauma, tedium. I put those things together. My direct contact was more global. So we all have a different view. That's just swell. Thanks for being here and thank you for your practice.